Well, credit card reform is here, taking effect today. Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney from New York introduced that bill. She joins us now to talk about it. I remember you saying I didn't even know if I was going to get this through committee, let alone get it all the way through. Does this really finally protect consumers?
It absolutely will protect consumers. It will level the playing field between issuers and consumers and put more money back into the consumers' pockets and allow them to make decisions of how they want to spend their money.
But you've talked about the fact, and you recently wrote an op-ed talking about the wild west of credit cards and how you just can't tame it. Because there are still holes in this legislation, aren't there? There are still places where credit cards can make moves that can hurt consumers, right?
Well, if they are going to make such a move, they have to tell the consumer and give the consumer 45 days notice that they intend to raise their interest rate or raise a fee. That's basically 2 billing dates. And the consumer then can make a decision that I do not accept this interest rate or this fee increase. I am going to pay off my balance at the existing rate and go to another issuer at a lower rate or at a lower fee.
But there was a point in time in the history of this country when there was a limit as to how high credit card companies could have interest rates, how high they could go. Because of a Supreme Court decision, that limit no longer exists. Shouldn't we have a limit on how high interest rates can be?
I believe this bill will put competition into the system. The Federal Reserve called the practices unfair, abusive, and anti-competitive. And it will allow the consumer to go to another card issuer with a lower fee, a lower interest rate, or with no fees. So it will lower the rates through competition. It's something we can do. If the Supreme Court has said we can't, then we have to do what we can. I believe that this will close the door on many of the tricks and traps that were being practiced. Most importantly, they will no longer be able to retroactively place an interest rate increase on an existing balance, which would trap consumers in a never-ending cycle of debt.
What does this mean for the availability of credit to consumers out there? What was predicted by the banks when this was signed by the president in May is that fewer credit cards would be issued, and that is what we have seen. Are you concerned about what this might mean for the availability of credit?
Well, many issuers were very opposed to the bill. I would have liked to have gone into effect 3 years ago when I first introduced it. And what's new? They have been raising fees. They have been raising rates retroactively on balances. They will no longer be able to do that. They will no longer be able to raise the interest rate for any time or any reason. They will no longer be able to charge you interest on a balance you've already paid. They will no longer be able to raise your interest rate because of you were 1 day late on a utility bill, or many of these ways that they would say they had 0 interest rate and you ended up with 30. The minute they start raising your interest rate and they no longer can go retroactive on your balance, that is huge. That is a huge, huge protection for consumers. The consumer then can say, I feel this fee is unfair. I feel this rate is unfair. I'm going to another card. I'm going to another issuer.
What would your advice be to consumers at this point? Now that they have this legislation helping protect them, what else do they have to watch out for?
They have to watch their own credit, and this will allow them to control their credit and control their purchases, control the fees and interest rates. I do not know of any gaping loophole in this bill, and if any action that they take to raise a fee or interest rate, they must inform the consumer. So my advice to consumers is, when you get notice and you have 45 days, I would not opt in to that fee increase. I wouldn't accept it. I would pay my rate off at the existing balance, go to another card.
The bank lobbyists, including the American Bankers Association, has argued that the reason that there are additional fees and rate hikes, et cetera, on credit cards is because it's the riskiest type of lending. What do you say to that argument made by the bank lobbyists in terms of the risk that the banks are incurring in terms of issuing credit?
Well, the consumers will now be able to make a decision whether or not they feel that these interest rates and fees are fair or unfair. And there will be more competition because all of the banks will be banned from doing the unfair practices. To the credit of many banks, some of them voluntarily implemented the reforms because it was the right thing to do for their customers. But one of them reneged on it, saying that it didn't benefit them. They were at a competitive disadvantage.
What bank is this?
This was Citibank. They implemented many of the reforms and then later reneged on it because customers weren't aware of these billing practices, and they were put at a competitive disadvantage with other banks that were practicing the unfair practices. So they reneged. This makes an equal playing field. All financial institutions that issue cards will be banned from the unfair, deceptive practices.